David Kane never expected his quiet life to be shattered. Living on the peaceful, remote human colony of Terran 7, he and his daughter Lily spent their days in contentment. The colony was small, nestled on a lush green planet far from the chaos of galactic wars and alien invasions. David worked as a mechanic, fixing ships and machines for the colony's residents, while Lily attended the local school. Their life wasn't perfect, but it was their own, and that was enough. But everything changed in an instant. One ordinary evening, as the colony prepared for the night shift, the sky above was torn open by an alien invasion. Massive Praetorian ships, ruthless and technologically advanced, descended from the stars. Their ships were enormous, sleek, and terrifying, casting shadows over the entire colony. These were not the kind of aliens you could reason with or run from. They were conquerors, known throughout the galaxy for their brutal efficiency and terrifying weapons. David had heard whispers about the Praetorians, their endless thirst for power, their coldness toward other species, and the technological marvels they wielded. But never did he imagine they would come for his colony. His peaceful life was shattered in moments, as explosions rang out and buildings crumbled. The once quiet streets now echoed with the sound of screams and the roar of alien weaponry. David immediately grabbed Lily's hand, his heart pounding in his chest. "We need to run, Lily. Now," he shouted, but she was frozen with fear, looking up at the massive Praetorian mothership that hovered above them. Panic surged through David's veins, but his focus was razor-sharp as he yanked Lily along, pushing through the crowd of panicked colonists. He needed to get her to safety. But the Praetorians were everywhere. Their soldiers, clad in black and silver armor, moved with brutal precision. In the chaos, David lost sight of Lily for only a second. That was all it took. A Praetorian soldier grabbed her, and despite David's desperate attempts to fight back, they were too strong. The soldier quickly lifted Lily into the air, and before David could reach them, a massive beam of light shot down from the mothership, pulling Lily up into the sky. She was gone. David watched in helpless horror as the ship ascended, disappearing into the blackness of space. His mind raced. This couldn't be happening. He reached out, but there was nothing he could do. His little girl was being taken by these aliens, and he was powerless to stop them. He fell to his knees, the world around him spinning as the weight of the loss sank in. For what seemed like an eternity, David was frozen, staring at the sky, feeling the emptiness of the moment deep within him. But then something inside him shifted. He couldn't stay here. He couldn't let Lily's fate be sealed by the hands of the Praetorians. With a surge of determination, he stood up, his fists clenched. He would find her. He would bring her back. But the odds were stacked against him. He was a simple mechanic, a father who had never seen a real battle. And the Praetorians were not just a small faction. They were an empire, a powerful and technologically advanced alien race. They had conquered worlds, destroyed civilizations, and they had now taken his daughter. How was he supposed to fight back against them? How could he stand up to an enemy with weapons that could obliterate entire cities in seconds? David knew the odds were almost impossible, but one thing burned inside him, the desire to see Lily again. He could not let her be lost to him forever. He wouldn't allow it. Just as David was about to give in to despair, a strange signal broke through the silence, a flickering transmission from the deep void of space. It wasn't a distress call, but something more. The signal seemed to come from a forgotten planet, one that was said to be lost to time. The coordinates pointed to Vular 9, an ancient world no one had heard of for centuries. David's heart raced as he listened to the signal. It was faint, but clear enough to make out one word: weapon. The legend spoke of a secret weapon buried on Vular 9, something powerful enough to challenge the Praetorians. Was this the glimmer of hope he'd been searching for? The legend said that the weapon was tied to an ancient civilization, one that had long ago vanished from the galaxy. No one knew what the weapon could do, but the fact that the Praetorians were not aware of it made it even more intriguing. Perhaps, just perhaps, this was the key to rescuing his daughter and defeating the alien invaders. David didn't hesitate. He knew the risks. He knew the journey would be dangerous, and the unknowns would be endless. But he also knew that he couldn't just sit back and let Lily be lost forever. The chance of finding this weapon, whatever it was the only hope he had. The alternative was to let the Praetorians win, to let them take everything from him. With no time to waste, David began preparing for his journey. His heart still ached from the loss of Lily, but it was no longer an obstacle. It was his fuel. As he packed the last of his supplies, he glanced up at the stars, knowing he was about to embark on a journey that would take him deep into the unknown. But even as he stepped into his ship, ready to chase down this faint signal, doubt gnawed at him. What if the weapon was a myth? What if Vuelor was just another dead end? And worst of all, what if the Praetorians were waiting for him, already one step ahead? David pushed these thoughts aside. His mind was set. He was going to find his daughter, and nothing would stop him. The ship's engines roared to life, and David set course for Vuelor, knowing that with each passing second, the odds were growing slimmer. But as the stars streaked by, one thing remained clear in his heart. This was not just a rescue mission. This was his fight for everything he loved. David's ship drifted silently through the vast emptiness of space, the stars twinkling coldly around him. The journey to Vuelor had taken days, and now, as the planet slowly grew larger on the ship's view screen, David's heart beat faster. He knew this was the last chance he had to save Lily. If the weapon really existed, it was here, buried on this forgotten world. Vuelor was nothing like the peaceful colony David had come from. As he entered the planet's atmosphere, the surface came into view, barren, desolate, and eerily quiet. The planet was a wasteland. There were no signs of life, no lush landscapes or thriving ecosystems. The terrain was rough, with jagged mountains and endless stretches of dry, cracked ground. What was once a thriving civilization now lay in ruins, its secrets buried deep beneath the surface. David landed his ship in a small open area, careful to avoid the deadly storms that occasionally swept across the planet's surface. The winds howled around him as he stepped out of the ship, his boots crunching on the dry ground. He scanned the horizon, seeing nothing but the vast emptiness. The air smelled of dust and decay. The once great city of Vuelor was now nothing more than crumbling stone, its buildings half buried by centuries of sand and erosion. It was hard to believe that anything could be hidden here, much less the weapon that might save Lily. David's mind raced as he moved forward. He couldn't afford to waste time. Every moment that passed, the Praetorians were getting farther away with his daughter. He needed to find the weapon, and he needed to find it fast. As he moved deeper into the ruins, he began to notice strange markings on the walls, symbols carved into the stone that seemed to glow faintly with an otherworldly light. They weren't from any known alien language. David couldn't make sense of them, but he had a feeling that these markings were the key to everything. His search led him through the remains of ancient buildings, their walls cracked and broken, their foundations long since crumbled. The deeper he ventured, the more the planet seemed to come alive around him. Alien plants that seemed to move on their own, strange sounds echoing from the dark corners of the ruins, and the occasional flash of glowing eyes in the distance. It was as if Vuelor itself was watching him, testing him. Suddenly, as David approached what appeared to be the remains of an ancient temple, the ground beneath him shifted. The surface cracked open with a loud rumble, and before he could react, he was falling into the darkness below. He landed hard, the wind knocked out of him, and for a moment, everything went black. When David regained consciousness, he found himself in a vast underground cavern. The air was thick with dust, and the faintest glow of light shone from deep within the cavern, drawing him forward. He stumbled to his feet, brushing himself off, and took a cautious step into the darkness. The walls of the cavern were lined with strange artifacts, advanced technology mixed with ancient relics. The room seemed to pulse with energy, as though something powerful was hidden here. David moved deeper into the cavern, the faint glow growing brighter as he approached the center. There, resting on a stone pedestal, was a suit unlike anything he had ever seen. It was a golden exoskeleton, intricately designed and covered with alien symbols. The suit seemed to hum with life, almost as if it were waiting for him. The air around it felt charged, filled with an energy that sent a chill down David's spine. This was it. This was the legendary Predator armor, the weapon that could change everything. David approached the armor cautiously, his heart racing. He had no idea how it worked, or even if it was safe, but he knew one thing. He had no other choice. He needed to put it on. With trembling hands, he reached out and touched the armor. The moment his fingers brushed the surface, something strange happened. A wave of power surged through him, flooding his senses. It was overwhelming. The armor seemed to respond to his touch, glowing brighter as if it recognized him. Suddenly, he was no longer alone. Flashes of memories filled his mind. Visions of ancient warriors who had worn this very armor, fighting in battles that spanned across galaxies. The spirits of those warriors seemed to reach out to him, their voices whispering in his mind, urging him to take control of the power within the suit. David stumbled backward, overwhelmed by the flood of emotions and sensations. His head throbbed with pain as the memories of the past warriors tried to take hold of him. It was as if the armor itself was alive, trying to connect him with the long-dead fighters who had once worn it. Their strength, their skills, their ferocity, they were all there, swirling around him like a storm. But David fought it. He had to remain in control. He couldn't let the armor consume him, not when his daughter's life was at stake. Taking a deep breath, David steeled himself. He could feel the power coursing through the armor, ready to be used. Slowly, carefully, he slid his arms into the gauntlets, his legs into the armored boots. The armor adjusted to his body, the golden plates shifting into place. It was heavy, but not unbearable. It felt right, as if he was meant to wear it. As the helmet slid into place, sealing him inside the suit, David felt a surge of energy unlike anything he had ever experienced. His senses sharpened, his strength increased tenfold, and his mind felt clearer than it ever had. He was no longer just David Kane, the mechanic from a small colony. He was something more now. He was the warrior the armor had chosen. But with this power came a price. David could feel the presence of the ancient warriors within the suit, feel their memories, their desires, their bloodlust. It was intoxicating, like a drug. And for a moment, David's resolve wavered. The armor urged him to embrace the violence, to let the warriors take control. But David knew better. He couldn't lose himself to this power. He had a mission. His daughter needed him. With a deep breath, David pushed aside the voices in his head and focused on the task at hand. He was ready. The armor had chosen him, but he would not let it define him. He would use its power to fight the Praetorians, to rescue Lily. Nothing would stop him now. And so, with the weight of the ancient armor on his shoulders and the fate of his daughter on his mind, David Kane stepped into the darkness, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As David stood in the heart of the underground temple, the weight of the Predator armor settled heavily on his shoulders. The golden exoskeleton, once a symbol of forgotten power, now fused with him. The moment he donned the suit, he felt the overwhelming surge of energy and strength coursing through his body. But he quickly realized that this power came with a cost. The armor was not just a weapon. It was alive. Its pulse was steady, its movements fluid, but it was also hungry. Deep within the suit, he could feel the presence of its previous wearers, ancient warriors whose spirits still lingered in the very fibers of the armor. Their memories, their instincts, their desires for battle were embedded within the exoskeleton, trying to force their way into his mind. David's first few steps felt like a heavy burden. The whispers from the past warriors were soft at first, barely audible in the back of his mind, but as the suit adjusted to him, their voices grew louder, more demanding. They were urging him to embrace the power they once wielded. Fight, they whispered. Destroy. The commands echoed in his mind like a constant drumbeat, pushing him toward violence. David clenched his fists, feeling the strength surge through his arms. His body was faster, stronger, more agile than it had ever been. The armor's enhancements were undeniable. Every movement felt effortless, as if the very air around him bent to his will. But with that power came an undeniable pull. The warrior's instincts, cold, ruthless, and deadly, started to take hold of him. Their memories of bloodshed and conquest began to flood his thoughts, drowning out his own. He could see their battles, the enemies they had torn apart without hesitation, the lives they had destroyed. And yet, amid these dark memories, flashes of his own life with Lily pierced through. He saw her face, her smile, her laugh, the way her eyes lit up whenever they were together. These memories, full of love and warmth, clashed violently with the cold, merciless nature of the warriors within the armor. David's heart ached with the conflict. He was a father, a man who loved his daughter deeply. He wasn't a killer. He couldn't be. But the armor was relentless. It pushed him to fight, to let go of his humanity and embrace the warrior's bloodlust. It was a constant battle, a war between the instincts of the ancient killers and his love for Lily, the desire to save her and protect the people he cared about. Every moment, the armor tugged at him, trying to consume him, to strip away the last traces of the man he had been before. David stumbled, his mind a battlefield. His body was moving on its own, the armor controlling him more than he controlled it. He lifted his arm, his fist clenched, and for a terrifying moment, he almost struck out at the stone walls of the temple. He could feel the warriors urging him to unleash the full force of the suit, to destroy everything in his path. But something inside him resisted. He couldn't let the armor take control. He couldn't let it turn him into something he wasn't. Gritting his teeth, David fought against the urge to give in. He focused on the one thing that kept him grounded, his love for Lily. His daughter needed him. She was out there, in the hands of the Praetorians, and if he gave in to the armor's power, he would lose himself. He couldn't do that. He couldn't let his humanity slip away, not when she needed him most. David closed his eyes and took a deep breath, trying to calm the chaos inside his mind. Slowly, he started to regain control. He focused on the memories of his life with Lily, the way she had always believed in him, how she had always looked to him for guidance and protection. He wasn't just a soldier in a battle. He was a father fighting for his daughter's life. As he fought against the darkness within the armor, something incredible happened. The suit seemed to respond to him differently. It wasn't just enhancing his strength and speed anymore. It was listening. The bond between him and the armor began to shift. The spirits of the warriors, though still present, were no longer overwhelming him. They were there, but David was the one in control. But the risk remained. The armor still held the potential to consume him completely. The memories of the ancient warriors were still there, waiting for a moment of weakness. David knew that even though he had gained some control, the struggle wasn't over. Every second in the armor felt like a battle, one that could turn in an instant. Determined to master the power of the suit, David set out to train. He needed to understand how to control the armor's abilities without losing himself to it. The next few days were grueling. The temple's vast underground spaces provided the perfect environment for training, endless corridors and chambers where David could test the limits of the armor. At first, it was a struggle. Every time he tried to move too quickly, the armor's deadly instincts would take over, pushing him to strike out, to attack. But David was learning. He began to focus, to slow down, and to tune out the whispers in his head. With each passing day, he grew stronger, more skilled in using the armor's power. His speed increased, his agility was unmatched, and his reflexes were sharper than ever before. But there was always the risk. The armor's pull was never far behind. It was as if it knew what he was trying to do, trying to tame it, trying to make it his own. The more David fought for control, the more the armor seemed to test him. One moment, he was leaping through the air with ease, moving faster than he could ever have imagined. The next, he would feel the spirits of the warriors clawing at his mind, trying to take over. And yet, through all the chaos, David held on. He could feel the bond between him and the armor growing stronger, more stable. It was no longer just a weapon. It was a part of him, a tool he could use in the battle against the Praetorians. But he also knew that every moment he wore it was a risk. The more he relied on the armor, the closer he came to losing himself. As the final days of his training passed, David stood before the temple's entrance, looking out into the darkness of Velar 9. He was ready. The armor had become an extension of himself, but he knew that this power came at a cost. He could use it to fight the Praetorians, to save Lily, but he had to stay vigilant. He couldn't let the armor's dark influence consume him. David's journey had only just begun, and the real test lay ahead. The Praetorians were still out there, and his daughter's life hung in the balance. But with the armor on his side, David was no longer just the man who had watched helplessly as his daughter was taken. He was a warrior, a father, and nothing, not even the armor's bond, could stop him from saving her. In the cold, dark reaches of space, the Praetorians continued their relentless search for the ultimate weapon. Their queen, Celara, stood at the heart of the command center aboard the Praetorian mothership, her sharp, cold eyes scanning the holographic map of the galaxy. The alien race, notorious for their advanced technology and ruthless conquests, had one goal in mind: domination. To achieve this, they needed to unlock the power hidden within the ruins of Velar 9, a forgotten world that, according to their intelligence, held an ancient weapon capable of giving them control over the galaxy. But there was a catch. The weapon wasn't just any ordinary tool of destruction. It was said to be linked to a legendary suit of armor, the Predator armor, and only one person had the knowledge to reveal its secrets: Lily Kane, the young daughter of the human mechanic who had discovered the armor. The Praetorians knew this, and now they were torturing Lily for any piece of information that might lead them to the weapon's hidden location. Lily, though frightened and exhausted, clung to her inner strength. The Praetorians, with their cold, mechanical precision, were determined to break her, but they had underestimated her resolve. She refused to give in, her love for her father and the hope that he would come for her giving her the strength to endure their cruel methods. Each day, they tried new tactics: intimidation, threats, and pain. But Lily's mind remained sharp. She held on to the belief that David was out there, coming for her, and that nothing would stop him. Meanwhile, on the surface of Velar 9, David was preparing for the fight of his life. The armor, now as second skin to him, had become more than just a tool. It was a part of him. But even with its incredible powers, David knew that the Praetorians were a force to be reckoned with. They were technologically superior, and their ruthless queen, Celara, would stop at nothing to crush him and his people. He had no choice but to strike first, before the Praetorians could mount a full-scale assault. David's first target was a small Praetorian scout fleet that had been detected near a nearby asteroid belt. With the Predator armor enhancing his senses, David was able to track the fleet's movements and plan his attack. The moment came. With a burst of speed, David launched his ship into the heart of the fleet, cloaking himself in the process to avoid detection. His ship became nearly invisible, a shadow among the stars, and he moved in with deadly precision. The Praetorian fleet had no idea what was coming. David's attack was swift and brutal. Cloaked, and using the element of surprise, he darted between enemy ships, taking out their advanced weaponry and shields with pinpoint accuracy. The Predator armor enhanced his reflexes, allowing him to dodge laser blasts with ease, moving faster than the Praetorians could track. His weapons were fast, and his aim was even faster. The Praetorian ships exploded in bursts of fire and light as David tore through them one by one, his every move executed with military precision. But even as David tore through the scout fleet, he could feel the weight of the Praetorians' strength. They were no ordinary enemy. Their ships were built for war, with cloaking devices and high-powered laser cannons that could tear through even the toughest of shields. The battle raged on, a chaotic clash of light and sound, with David weaving through the chaos, taking down Praetorian soldiers and ships with a combination of speed, precision, and the sheer power of the armor. As the last of the scout ships exploded in a fiery blaze, David exhaled deeply, his body still vibrating with the power of the suit. He had won, but the victory felt hollow. His enemies were still out there, larger, stronger, more determined than ever. The Praetorians would not back down so easily. This first strike had only been the beginning. The true battle was yet to come. David couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the air. His heart was heavy with the knowledge that Lily was still out there, trapped in the heart of the Praetorian mothership. He knew that the Praetorians would now be on high alert, hunting him with even more determination. His victory over the scout fleet had given him some breathing room, but it had also drawn attention. The Praetorians would retaliate, and their queen, Celara, would not rest until she had crushed him and recovered the armor. The stakes were higher now than ever before. David's mission was clear: find Lily, defeat the Praetorians, and stop their plan to use the ancient weapon to dominate the galaxy. The Predator armor had given him the strength and skills he needed to fight, but he had learned something crucial. The Praetorians were not a foe to be underestimated. Even with his newfound power, the next battle would be the real test. As he prepared for what was to come, David knew there was no turning back. The Praetorians would stop at nothing to get what they wanted, and now it was a race against time. The fate of his daughter, and perhaps the future of humanity, rested on his shoulders. David Kane, once just a mechanic on a quiet colony, was now humanity's last hope. But as he looked up at the stars, he knew that the Praetorians would come for him with everything they had. He had to be ready, because the battle was far from over. And somewhere, out in the darkness of space, Queen Celara watched with cold, calculating eyes, knowing that the hunt was on. The Praetorians had underestimated David once, but that would not happen again. The war for the galaxy's future had begun, and the true fight was only just starting. The Praetorian flagship loomed in the distance, a massive, intimidating structure drifting in the cold emptiness of space. David had finally tracked it down. This was where Lily was being held, locked away by the ruthless Praetorians. The stakes couldn't be higher. His daughter's life was on the line, and every second counted. But David had a plan. With the Predator armor enhancing his abilities, he felt ready. The armor had become more than just a weapon. It had become a tool, an extension of himself. The spirits of the ancient warriors still whispered in his mind, but now David had learned to control them. The time had come to infiltrate the enemy's stronghold and bring his daughter home. Using the armor's cloaking device, David silently moved through the shadows. The Praetorians were notorious for their security, but David knew he had the element of surprise on his side. The flagship's towering spires and fortified walls were no match for the combination of advanced cloaking technology and his unmatched agility. Every step was calculated, every movement precise. He had been in enough battles to know how to stay hidden, how to move silently, and now he was putting everything he had learned into practice. He made his way through the massive structure, his senses heightened by the armor's enhancements. Every corner, every hallway was a potential danger, but the Praetorians had no idea he was there. The tension built with every silent step he took as he crept deeper into the heart of the flagship. The mission was clear: find Lily and get her out. But as David moved forward, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The Praetorians were always alert, and their technology was second to none. They might not know he was there yet, but it wouldn't take long before they did. Finally, David reached the heart of the flagship, a large, cold chamber deep within the ship. The air was thick with tension as David prepared for the inevitable. The Praetorians were about to learn that the man they had taken so lightly was not just a simple mechanic. He was a father on a mission to save his daughter, and nothing would stop him. Suddenly, alarms blared across the ship. The Praetorians had detected him. David's heart raced, but he didn't hesitate. He activated the armor's enhanced speed, charging into the narrow corridors, cloaked, but with no time to waste. The corridors twisted and turned, becoming a labyrinth of steel and cold metal. As he rounded a corner, a Praetorian soldier appeared, his weapons ready. David didn't think. He moved like lightning, his fist slamming into the soldier's face with a brutal punch. The Praetorian crumpled to the ground in an instant, but this was only the beginning. The Praetorians were everywhere. As David moved through the ship, more and more soldiers appeared, pouring out of the shadows, ready to stop him. The fight became an explosive close-quarters battle. Laser beams flashed past him as David darted between cover, using the walls and the shadows to his advantage. He didn't have time to think. Every movement had to be precise. He slashed through Praetorian soldiers with the sharp edges of the armor's gauntlets, dodging blasts and countering with brutal efficiency. The ship's narrow corridors made it a fight for survival. David fought his way through, sword in hand, slicing through soldiers who tried to stop him. Explosions rocked the walls as the tension of the battle grew. Close-range gunfire echoed in the halls, but David's reflexes, heightened by the armor, allowed him to move faster than ever. He ducked under the blast of a laser gun, rolling forward and slamming the heel of his boot into the face of another soldier. The chaos of combat surrounded him, but David was focused. He couldn't let anything distract him, not even the roar of gunfire or the flashing of explosions. Each battle felt more intense than the last. The Praetorians were relentless, their advanced technology and weapons making them formidable opponents. But David, fueled by the love for his daughter and the rage of every moment he'd spent separated from her, was unstoppable. He cut through their forces like a whirlwind, his every movement sharp and calculated, with the full force of the armor behind him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of fighting, David reached the central command deck. It was here that Lily was being held. His heart raced as he approached the final door. This was it. He could feel her presence behind that door. He could hear her, his daughter, alive. But as he reached for the door, it slid open with a mechanical hiss, and there she was. Lily. She was chained to a cold, metallic chair, her face bruised but her eyes burning with defiance. She looked up at him, her expression shifting from fear to relief in an instant. She had never doubted that her father would come for her. But standing in front of her before the doorway was not just the relief of seeing her father, it was the final battle. And it was about to begin. As David stepped forward to free her, the air shifted. A cold, malicious voice rang out, sending a chill through the room. "You think you can just waltz in here and take her from me?" The voice belonged to Celara, the Praetorian queen. She stepped forward from the shadows, her tall, imposing figure casting a menacing shadow. Her eyes were filled with cold calculation as she looked David up and down. "You may have the armor, but you are still weak. I can see it in your eyes. You are not the same man who walked onto this ship. Your humanity is slipping away. Soon, you'll be no better than the warriors inside that armor." David's fists clenched. Celara was right in one way. The longer he fought, the more the armor's influence took hold. But he wasn't going to let it control him. Not now. Not when his daughter was so close. "You're wrong, Celara," David growled, his voice full of conviction. "I will always be human. And no matter what, I will never stop fighting for her." The queen's lips curled into a wicked smile. "Then let's see if your humanity is enough to save you." With a sudden movement, Celara lunged at him. The final battle between father and queen was about to begin, an epic confrontation of strength, will, and the fight to save a life. David's heart pounded in his chest, but his determination was stronger than ever. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The time to rescue his daughter had come, and he would not fail. David had just freed Lily, and for the briefest moment, everything felt like it was going to be okay. The weight of the endless battles, the fierce struggles, the pain of the past few days, all of it seemed to disappear when he saw her face light up in recognition. He had come for her. His heart swelled with relief and hope, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he thought he might finally get her back. But that feeling of triumph was short-lived. As David moved toward the exit, Lily and Tao, the alarms blared louder than ever, and the door behind them slid shut with an ominous thud. It happened so fast that David couldn't even react. He turned to see a figure stepping out of the shadows, someone he had trusted, someone who had been with him since the beginning. Derek, a fellow soldier and ally, had been helping him throughout the mission. But now, standing in front of him, his eyes cold and empty, there was no trace of the man who had fought by David's side. Instead, Derek's face was twisted with a grim smile, a smile that sent chills down David's spine. "You thought I was on your side, didn't you?" Derek's voice was sharp, almost mocking. "You're not the only one who wants power. The Praetorians promised me that armor, and now I'm going to take it for myself." David felt a cold wave of disbelief crash over him. Derek had been working for the Praetorians all along. The betrayal was so sudden, so sharp, that David couldn't comprehend it at first. He had trusted this man. Together, they had fought through so many battles, shared countless moments of danger. And now this. Derek's true loyalty had never been to David or Lily. It had always been to the Praetorians, and he had been waiting for the right moment to strike. Before David could react, Derek activated a hidden device that released a burst of energy, sending a shockwave that threw David and Lily to the ground. The armor absorbed the blast, but it still knocked David back. He was momentarily dazed, the impact sending shockwaves through his body. The betrayal hurt more than he expected, and for a moment, he felt completely powerless. Lily screamed, but David, even with the strength of the armor, could barely move. Derek laughed, his voice filled with smug satisfaction. "I knew you were getting weak, David. The armor has been taking control of you. You've already lost. And now, I'll finish it." With that, Derek activated his own suit, a Praetorian prototype that he had been given in exchange for his loyalty. The suit, though not as powerful as the Predator armor, was still formidable, and Derek launched himself at David with incredible speed. The battle was brutal. David tried to get up, but his mind was clouded with anger and confusion. Derek's betrayal weighed heavily on him, and the armor didn't help. It fueled his rage, pushing him toward violence. The armor's spirit of past warriors whispered in his mind, urging him to fight, to take what was rightfully his. But David fought to keep control, to keep his humanity intact. The armor was powerful, yes, but it was also dangerous. Every blow he struck seemed to get harder, more vicious. Every move felt like it was made by someone else, someone less human. The fight raged on in the narrow hallways of the flagship, the sounds of clashing metal and shattering glass echoing throughout the ship. David fought with all the strength the armor gave him, but Derek's betrayal was clouding his focus. Every strike, every movement, felt like it was becoming more detached, more machine-like. The line between man and armor was starting to blur, and with each passing second, David felt himself slipping away. At one point, David's vision became blurry, his thoughts scattered. The armor was taking over. It was pushing him to fight harder, to destroy Derek without mercy. But David knew that if he let it, if he gave in to the armor's power, he would lose himself completely. He could feel the anger and violence bubbling inside him, but he fought to hold it back. He had to stay in control, not just for his own sake, but for Lily. If he lost himself now, Everything he had fought for would be meaningless. Then, in the chaos of the battle, something clicked in David's mind. The armor wasn't just a weapon, it was a curse. It had been slowly corrupting him, turning him into something he didn't want to be. He realized that he couldn't keep fighting with it, couldn't rely on its power anymore. If he wanted to save Lily, and if he wanted to save himself, he had to destroy the armor. It was the only way. As Derek moved in for the final blow, David's mind raced. He knew what he had to do. With all the strength he could muster, he pushed the armor to its limits, using the last of its power to break free from Derek's grasp. The world seemed to slow down around him as he made his way toward the central control room of the ship. Derek followed him, his Kratorian armor glowing with power, but David's focus was unwavering. "Lily, get to the escape pods," he ordered, his voice rough but clear. "I'm going to finish this. I love you." Lily's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't hesitate. She ran toward the escape pods, knowing what her father was about to do. David, with the last of his strength, activated the self-destruct sequence for the armor, preparing to destroy it once and for all. The Kratorians' technology was formidable, but the armor had always been more powerful than anything they had. And now, David knew that the only way to stop the corruption was to destroy the source. The final moment came, and David, with his back to the control panel, faced Derek one last time. The Kratorian traitor stood there, grinning, his weapon aimed at David's chest. But David didn't flinch. The armor, despite everything, had one last gift to offer. It made David strong enough to destroy it. With one final, explosive punch, David shattered the control panel and released the destructive energy that had been building up inside the armor. The explosion rocked the ship, sending shockwaves through the entire structure. Derek was thrown back, his suit damaged beyond repair. David, though wounded, stood tall. The armor had been destroyed, and in doing so, David had saved his humanity. The battle was over. He had rescued Lily, and he had won. But even as the Kratorian flagship began to fall apart, David knew that the war was far from over. The Kratorians would come again, but for now, he had his daughter back, and that was enough. The battle that awaited David was unlike any he had faced before. After everything he had endured, every fight, and every loss, the final enemy, the Kratorian queen, Selara, stood before him, ready to end it all. But this time, it wasn't just the fate of his daughter, Lily, that was at stake. It wasn't even just the fate of their colony or the war against the Kratorians. This was the endgame, the final battle for humanity's survival. The Kratorian fleet had retreated to the heart of a dying star, a place that seemed almost symbolic of their own fate, brilliant but doomed. The collapsing star, surrounded by radiation storms and collapsing gravity fields, was the perfect place for their last stand. Selara, with her alien cunning and ruthless ambition, had chosen it, knowing that the hostile environment would destroy any fleet foolish enough to engage her. David had no choice but to follow. His armor, though now stripped of much of its overwhelming power, still held a piece of its former strength. He knew that the only way to stop Selara and her plans was to face her head-on in the heart of that dying star. As David's ship neared the star, the massive Kratorian flagship loomed ahead, its menacing silhouette against the burning backdrop of the star's death throes. The ship's advanced technology, once the stuff of nightmares, now felt vulnerable to David. He had learned to fight smarter, relying on his wits and his strength, not the armor. But still, he knew this battle would be his most difficult yet. Selara's voice echoed through the comms, cold and mocking. "You've come so far, human, but it's all for nothing. The galaxy will kneel before the Kratorians, and you will die knowing that your pathetic rebellion was doomed from the start." David's grip tightened on the controls of his ship. He had nothing left to lose. The armor, the power, all of it had led to this moment. The only thing that mattered now was stopping Selara and saving Lily. The Kratorian fleet surged forward, their cloaking devices vanishing in the chaos of the star's radiation storms. They attacked with deadly precision, unleashing their final weapon, a massive destructive beam that threatened to tear David's ship apart. David's heart raced as he activated the last remnants of the armor's power. The energy coursed through him like a tidal wave. But this time, he was ready. He wasn't just using the armor for strength. He was using it for one final, heroic act. As the Praetorian fleet launched their devastating attack, David made a decision. He would give everything to destroy them once and for all. With one final command, David unleashed all of the armor's energy in a single devastating blast. The surge of power lit up the sky like a supernova, the force of the blast so intense that it ripped through the Praetorian fleet with terrifying efficiency. Ships exploded in brilliant flashes, their advanced weapons useless against the raw power of David's sacrifice. The energy from the blast tore through the heart of the Praetorian flagship, sending shockwaves through space. Celera's ship began to break apart, her screams of rage echoing through the comms as her fleet disintegrated around her. But even as the Praetorian Queen's ship spiraled toward its destruction, she refused to give in. Her last-ditch effort to escape was futile. The armor's power had consumed David, but it had also consumed the Praetorians. The balance of power had shifted. The light of David's final attack blazed brighter than the dying star behind him. As the energy of the blast burned through the space around him, David felt his life slipping away. The armor, the last remaining link to its ancient power, had drained him completely. His body, exhausted from the constant strain of its influence, could no longer fight it. But even as he fell into darkness, there was one final moment of clarity. David turned to Lily, who had been watching the destruction unfold from the ship's observation deck. Her face was full of terror and confusion. She had seen her father fight countless battles, but this was different. This was the end. David reached out, his hand trembling as he touched the glass separating them. His eyes met hers, and in that brief moment, everything he had fought for, everything he had sacrificed, became clear. He had done this for her future, for her survival. He had fought for humanity. And now, with his final breath, he would make sure she would carry on the fight. Lily's eyes filled with tears as she pressed her hand against the glass. "Dad, no." David's voice, weak but steady, came through the comms. "Lily, you have to carry on. The fight isn't over. You're the future now. Humanity will rise above the darkness. Promise me, you'll never give up." In those final moments, as David's body began to fade, the armor's power fully consumed him. His last memory was of Lily's hand, pressed against the glass, as if holding him one final time. He knew that his death would not be in vain. He had given everything, and in doing so, he had ensured that humanity would have a chance to rebuild. The dying star continued to burn, but in its light, David's sacrifice would live on. The Praetorian threat was no more. Their fleet was shattered, their queen defeated, and the galaxy was free from their oppressive rule. But the real victory was in the legacy David left behind. As the debris of the Praetorian fleet drifted through space, Lily was left to lead the survivors. The once vibrant colony, now reduced to ashes, would rise again, and at its helm was Lily, the new protector, the daughter of a hero who had given everything to ensure that humanity could survive. The story of David's sacrifice would become a legend, one that future generations would remember as the turning point in the war against the Praetorians. His name would live on in the hearts of those who fought alongside him, and in the minds of those who would never forget the man who had saved them all. And so, as the galaxy began to heal from the scars of war, Lily led humanity forward. Her father's spirit, and the lessons he had taught her, would guide her as she rebuilt the colony and helped others find their strength. The darkness that had once threatened to consume them all had been overcome, and the light of hope now shone brighter than ever before. The war was over, but the fight for freedom, for humanity's future, was just beginning.